Hey guys, Merry Christmas, and it is story time again. When my oldest son Elisha was about 2.5 years old, he fell off his bike and broke his leg. Now, it couldn't have happened at a more inconvenient time. We were in the midst of moving overseas as missionaries for the very first time, and so it was a very bad time to break a leg, or so we thought. It turned out to be rather beneficial. You see, we had a lot of work and moving to do, and our very active toddler was always a challenge to manage when our attentions were elsewhere. And having him confined to a stroller or a chair with his casted leg, turned out it made moving a little easier. It made him a little bit easier to manage in the airports and the trams and buses as we were transporting around. And we also took a trip to Disneyland with Grandma and Grandpa as kind of one last hurrah before we left for the mission field. And it turns out when you've got a little guy in a wheelchair, you get to go to the front of all the lines. And so having Elisha in a cast and hobbled, as it were, turned out to be of some benefit to us. Well, we'll come back to that story, but Christmas has always been about others. It is Christ's incarnation, his condescension, his humiliation, his kenosis, as Philippians 2:7 tells us, the emptying of himself, becoming what we needed in the way that we needed it. We needed him to come as a man, though we didn't know that at the time. And yet he came anyway. We would reject him. He would be shamed. He would be called illegitimate. And yet he came anyway. We would persecute him. We would belittle him. And he came anyway. We would strike him. We would spit on him. He came anyway. We would strip him naked. We would strip his skin off of him. We would nail him to a tree. He came anyway. And when he emerged victorious over death, achieving reconciliation to God and righteousness for all mankind, the vast majority of us would not believe it to be true. Yea, we were even offended at the thought of it and resolved to hate him even more. And he came anyway. And so it seems that the condition for God's love and mercies toward us have nothing to do with our assent to his love and to him. They are entirely of himself, requiring no confirmation or acknowledgement from our end. Meaning, even if not one single human responded to his incarnation, he would come anyway. He came without conditions or contingencies. He saw the need, so he came, because that's how his character responds to our need when being true to his own character. But Christmas has always been about others. And I guess that's what's been disturbing to me, is that I am seeing more and more ways that people in general, but Christians in particular, are finding ways to narrow our love, to place explicit conditions on it and be partial with it, and then justify it. I'm concerned what happens to our minds and our hearts when we funnel the fruits of the Spirit into a mold that is just so. You know, when my son broke his leg, it broke our hearts a little bit. He was a really active little guy, and he was constantly running and climbing and breaking and building stuff, and every crazy active thing that you can imagine, he was the kind of kid that was doing it. And so he was pretty exhausting. because that meant that when he was a toddler, we could literally never sit down. And honestly, when he broke his leg falling off his bike, it was probably in one of those very few moments that we had taken a break to sit down and not hover over all the crazy things that he was doing. But he got his cast, and this cast went from his foot all the way up above his knee onto his thigh, and it completely restricted his freedom, and it hobbled him. And we felt a bit guilty because honestly, he was a lot easier to manage when his freedom was hobbled. Having him under control was so much easier for us. But then we started to feel a little bit guilty about that, because over the 6 weeks that he had that cast on, we slowly saw just the vivaciousness and his will being drained out of him. And we didn't like that, and we saw that he was angry and frustrated because he wasn't able to do what he was used to doing and what he desired to do. And so we wanted to see him active again. We wanted to see him adventuring and getting into trouble, despite the fact that we knew that life was going to be more difficult for us when that cast came off. So when he did get his cast off, his muscles had been atrophying and locked in place for that time, and they had lost their flexibility. So it fell on us as parents to do the physical therapy with his leg that he needed, and that was not fun. We had to force him to bend his knee and stretch out the muscles and the tendons, and it was terribly painful for him. Unfortunately, we don't always have a loving person that will do the physical therapy that we need in our lives. In fact, there are those who would keep us casted. They would keep us hobbled. We're more convenient that way. And this is what I'm concerned about. Imagine overlapping circles, like a Venn diagram. We have been and are contracting, like atrophying muscles. And whether that circle represents social life or politics or theology or just lifestyle philosophies, it seems like we are in a season of being narrowed. We have less and less in common with the people who are around us. We have less and less in common with the people that aren't in our very rigid and narrowing circle, and we're edging them out. How can we exercise our spirits? How can we expand our circles? Who are we waiting for to do the necessary work of physical therapy with us? We have to take some steps and start this process ourselves. And the first step is taking that cast off. A cast is a useful thing for a period of time. After a certain period of time, it becomes harmful or even destructive. We don't typically think of it that way, but when a cast is left on permanently, or when a limb is casted for far too long, we know that this is not a good thing. It can be scary taking off a cast, depending on how hard and thick the shell is maybe, or how long that cast has been on there, but it has to be done. And the second step is that we need to give that limb a good wash. There is stinky, nasty, festering stuff underneath that cast, especially if it's been on for far too long. The skin is ashy. We got to give that limb a scrub. We need some lotion, some balm. We need some renewal to treat the long season of neglect. And finally, it's time to stretch out that circle. Muscles. It's going to be uncomfortable, and the people around you might even try to convince you to retreat back to a place that is safe and comfortable, preferably in a cast. But this is your limb, and if you want to be a fully functional person again, you've got to stretch it out. Go spend some time with people that you haven't seen in a while. Better yet, go spend some time with people you know that you don't agree with. Go out to coffee with them. And when the people hobbling around you in caste tell you that you ought not be doing such a thing, do it anyway. Find ways to get out of that narrow channel that you've been in. You need to expand your muscles. It won't be easy, but do it anyway. If you don't, you may be in that narrow channel for a very, very long time. And you may never get out. You may never regain function in that limb again. So this Christmas, if you find yourself caught in that narrow channel, or if you can sense yourself being constrained in that narrowing, rigid circle, or wrestling with the voices that are beckoning you to stay in your caste, remember, He came anyway.